Chat on Newsday Amarillo and News Channel 10-2. I'm David Lovejoy.
And I'm on a first name basis with everyone. Chuckalicious Chuck Williams.
And today we've got one of our favorites in, Dr. Lance Izumi. He is part of the Pacific Education Institute. He looks at education, especially early education and the development. We have Dr. Izumi in quite often. It's kind of apropos as the school year wraps up. This is a great time to take a look at what we're looking at and how we're doing things. A recent study showed that after coming out of the pandemic, most children were 2 to 3 years behind in their progress in education. Some say kids are resilient; they can make this up. Others say this is just lost time,
Right.
and way to wake it up. Dr. Zume, how are you doing today, sir?
Well, I'm doing terrific, David. Great to be here with you and with Chuck. Wanted to say early happy Memorial Day weekend to all your listeners and viewers.
Dr. Zume, this has been something that we've talked about and we've heard in different circles. And it's been a big concern, especially from 2019 up. Kids have had a lot more obstacles to education due to restrictions. Some districts opened up early, took that chance. Other states, I couldn't believe how late some California and Chicago, Illinois schools were closed into the pandemic. But this put kids in a very perilous position when it comes to education. Tell us a little bit about how far we're behind right now in the educational process.
Yes, well, I think it's a real travesty and a massive concern for Americans. Because it's going to have a long lasting impact on not just the kids but our economy and society. I mean, you look at some of these devastating learning loss research that we're getting right now, and you alluded to it, David. I mean, Harvard, for example, just came out with a new study a couple weeks ago that showed that learning loss around the country, let's say in mathematics, was half a year's worth of learning loss. But then you look in some places, particular places like, for example, a place like New Haven, Connecticut, which is the home of Yale University,
Right.
and yet the learning loss there in mathematics was a year and a half. And so you're having like real problems, for kids. And if you look at compare the test scores of kids on, let's say, our national test in the United States, which is called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and you look at a state, let's say, like Texas, in 2019, before the pandemic, you had about 30% of the kids in the 8th grade were proficient in mathematics, which is not a great total. That's less than 1/3. But by 2022, as the pandemic was beginning to recede, it went from 30% down to 24%. So only a quarter of the kids were proficient in mathematics in the 8th grade. So, that is a real problem. And as you alluded to, David, in your opening, these kids, don't get that learning back in many cases. The Harvard study, I think one of the things that is most sobering in the new Harvard study is to show that they look at how much learning kids can get back, historically, when they've had real drops in performance. And what they found is that kids usually only get back, especially in mathematics, that they usually get back only 20 to 30% of what they've ever lost. So, you're saying that most of the kids' learning loss will never be made up, at least if they stay in the same type of learning situation that caused that learning loss in the first place. You can't expect a system that was responsible for that loss to make it up.
Well, Doc, from what I'm hearing and from what I feel, this almost makes the whole idea of the state standardized tests, that makes that obsolete. If they're losing that much, why even bother? Because they're not even going to pass something like that, are they?
Well, yeah, Chuck, I think that a lot of people, will look at those test scores and wonder. I mean, sometimes it's people want to blame the messenger, and the test scores certainly are the messenger. I do think that one of the things that we need to remember, though, is that just like a doctor who's diagnosing a patient, they have to give them tests in order to find out what's wrong with them. And I
Right.
think that, if you're about let's say the public schools as the patient, you have to have tests in order to see if there's something wrong. The key really is, what are you going to do with the bad test results, right? I mean,
Right.
if you continue to do the same thing over and over again that produced the bad condition in the first place, well, that is the classic definition of stupidity, right?
Right.
And
Insanity.
yep, right, insanity. And so, therefore, I think that while all of us are very concerned and shocked, about the crash in test scores and the learning loss that kids have suffered over the pandemic, I think then we have to be thinking then about what are we going to do in order to address that learning loss. And again, if as Harvard showed, doing the same thing has not worked in the past,
Right.
well, what kinds of newer things are we going to use? I think that's why you see a lot of parents, for example, who have decided to unenroll their kids in the regular public schools. We've talked on your show about the huge increase in homeschooling.
Hmm.
I think that around the country now, state after state after state across the country are adopting new types of learning programs, such especially in the area of school choice. And I think that that's you look at Utah, Iowa, West Virginia,
Hmm.
Florida, all those different states have adopted education savings accounts that allow parents to be able to use their per pupil funding from the state, not to just send them to a one size fits all regular public school, but to be able to create an individualized learning program for their child that really meets the needs of where they are. I mean, if you have a kid who has dyslexia and really suffered under the pandemic, well, you can create that individualized learning to address your kid's dyslexia, as opposed to trying to rely upon the school and their program. So anyway, I think that that's what people are looking for right now. Is they're looking for flexibility, they're looking for individualized learning, and they're looking for something that meets the needs of their child, not just something that will meet supposedly the needs of an entire classroom.
Dr. Azume, what angers me and probably saddens me more is, did the system learn a lesson from this? They were ill prepared to handle offsite learning. Website now colleges did a better job because they have that infrastructure in place for those online education opportunities. Did it for 15 years of how to do that, but most school districts uh, didn't have a plan in place. It was just all we can do is shut down. In your work and your research, have we learned a lesson? Have we started asking of our public education institutes to have a plan in place if something like this happens again? I think some pre planning can save a lot of future problems if we do that.
No, I absolutely think you're right, David. That really hits the nail on the head. Is that you can have a very bad episode in your life, but the question then is, what do you learn from it, right? And if you learn something good, then actually maybe the bad episode was a silver lining, right? And so, but if you just keep on doing what you were doing before that bad situation, well, then that didn't help you or anybody. And so I think that this is really a moment for the United States to be able to revisit the way it thinks about education and the learning for our children. And I think that as you pointed out, David, the regular public schools, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, were totally unprepared for the COVID pandemic. And
Right.
when it hit, ability to change course was very limited. And it's rather like the Titanic, right? Looking at that iceberg, and it's
Hmm.
not able to change course. And I think that that's what happened with the regular public schools. They didn't have the plans and infrastructure in place in order to shift. And I think that what you pointed out is that there were some education institutions, especially in charter schools, that were able to pivot to an online learning situation.
Hmm.
That the reason why is because they actually had that online learning already programmed